Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you've been scrolling through social media in the past 48 hours, you've probably seen LA riots trending everywhere. And I mean everywhere, from Twitter to TikTok, from Instagram to YouTube. Everyone's talking about what's happening in Los Angeles right now. But here's the thing, a lot of people are confused about what's actually going on. Is this another case of civil unrest? What sparked it? And why did President Trump just deploy 2,000 National Guard troops to LA? In today's video, we're going to break down everything you need to know about the LA riots that have taken over the internet. We'll dive deep into what triggered these protests, why they escalated so quickly, and what this means for immigration policy in America. Trust me, this story is way more complex than what you're seeing in those viral clips. But before we jump in, if you're new here, welcome to the channel. We break down trending news stories with the context you need to actually understand what's happening. And if you find this helpful, smash that like button and subscribe with notifications on, because this story is still developing and I'll be covering all the updates. So let's start from the beginning. This whole situation began on Friday, June 6, 2025, when Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's ICE, conducted what they called enforcement operations across Los Angeles. Now, this wasn't just a small operation. We're talking about coordinated raids that hit multiple locations simultaneously. According to reports from Reuters and other major news outlets, ICE agents targeted several key areas. They hit a clothing warehouse in LA's Fashion District, multiple Home Depot locations where day laborers typically gather, a donut shop, and several other businesses. The Department of Homeland Security says they arrested 118 people in total, including what they describe as 5 people linked to criminal organizations. But here's where it gets really intense. Witnesses describe seeing unmarked vehicles that looked like military transport rolling through LA streets, loaded with federal agents in full gear. Video footage shows crowds of people trying to physically block ICE vehicles from leaving with detainees. One union president, David Huerta, from the Service Employees International Union, California, was actually arrested and charged with impeding federal agents. The Latino community in LA, which makes up a huge portion of the population, immediately mobilized. We're talking about areas where over 80% of residents identify as Latino. For many of these communities, this felt like an invasion. The fear wasn't just about who got arrested that day, but about what this meant for everyone living there. So Friday night, after the raids, hundreds of protesters gathered outside federal buildings downtown. According to ABC Australia's comprehensive report, the initial protests were focused and organized. People were chanting ICE out of LA and set them free, let them stay. But things started escalating when protesters began trying to break into the Roybal Federal Building where many of the detainees were being held. Here's where it gets chaotic. Police in riot gear formed lines to push protesters back. Tear gas was deployed. Some protesters started vandalizing the federal building, spray painting graffiti on the walls. The LAPD eventually declared an unlawful assembly, but the protests didn't stop, they spread. Saturday is when everything really exploded. ICE conducted more raids, this time in Paramount, a predominantly Latino suburb of LA. But this time, the community was ready. Hundreds of protesters immediately surrounded the federal agents. Video footage shows people on motorcycles waving Mexican flags, protesters setting cars on fire, and federal agents in gas masks facing off against crowds. And this is where social media comes in. These dramatic images and videos started going viral immediately. You had footage of burning cars, riot police, protesters with Mexican flags, tear gas clouds. It was visually intense content that spread like wildfire. The hashtags LAR riots and ICE out started trending globally within hours. Now, here's where things get really serious. President Trump's response was swift and dramatic. On Saturday evening, he signed a presidential memorandum deploying 2,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles. That's not a small number. We're talking about a significant military presence. But it's not just what Trump did, it's how his administration framed it. White House aide Stephen Miller called the protests a violent insurrection. Vice President J.D. Vance posted on social media calling the protesters insurrectionists carrying foreign flags. Trump himself posted on Truth Social threatening to deal with what he called riots and looters if local officials couldn't handle it. This language is really important because it frames this as not just a law enforcement issue, but as a national security threat. When you call protesters insurrectionists, you're using the same language that was used for January 6th. That's a deliberate choice that signals how seriously the federal government is taking this. California Governor Gavin Newsom pushed back hard, calling Trump's National Guard deployment purposefully inflammatory. He said Trump was deploying troops not because there is a shortage of law enforcement, but because they want a spectacle. LA Mayor Karen Bass also condemned the ICE raids, saying they sow terror in our communities. So, why is this trending everywhere? First, it's the visuals. We're seeing images that look like scenes from a war zone in one of America's biggest cities. Burning cars, riot police, tear gas, military vehicles. This is content that naturally goes viral because it's so dramatic and shocking. Second, this hits right at the heart of one of the most divisive political issues in America right now. Trump made immigration crackdown a centerpiece of his campaign, setting a goal for ICE to arrest at least 3,000 migrants per day. For his supporters, these raids represent keeping campaign promises. For his critics, this represents government overreach and targeting of vulnerable communities. Third, you have this compelling narrative of community resistance. Videos of people literally throwing themselves in front of ICE vehicles, protesters chanting while surrounded by tear gas. This creates a David versus Goliath story that resonates with people regardless of their political views. And finally, this is getting international attention because it involves people waving Mexican flags and assertions about American identity. When you have protesters proudly displaying foreign flags while facing off against federal agents, that creates a symbolic conflict that transcends just immigration policy. Here's what's really important to understand. This isn't happening in a vacuum. The Trump administration has pledged what they call mass deportations and has been trying to remove birthright citizenship and suspend habeas corpus. That's the right to challenge your detention in court. So these raids are part of a much broader immigration crackdown. For immigrant communities in LA, this feels existential. We're talking about areas where significant portions of the population might be undocumented or have mixed status families. When ICE shows up with what looks like military force, it creates terror that goes way beyond just the people who were arrested. What happens in LA could set the precedent for how these immigration operations play out in other cities. If the federal government can deploy the National Guard in response to protests against immigration raids, that changes the dynamic significantly for other communities facing similar operations. So to sum up why LA riots is trending, we have large-scale immigration raids that sparked immediate community resistance, dramatic escalation into what authorities are calling riots, viral social media content showing intense confrontations, and now a federal response involving thousands of National Guard troops. This isn't just a local story. It's become a symbol of the broader conflicts over immigration policy in America. The situation is still developing as I'm recording this. The National Guard is supposed to arrive within 24 hours. Protests are continuing, and both sides seem to be digging in for a prolonged confrontation. I'll be following this story closely and will post updates as they happen. What do you think about all this? Are these justified law enforcement operations or government overreach? How do you think this should be handled? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, regardless of where you stand politically, it's important that we have these conversations based on facts, not just the viral clips we see on social media. If you want to stay informed about developing stories like this, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. I break down complex news stories so you can understand what's really happening behind the headlines. And if this video helped you understand the situation better, give it a like. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.